Now, I'd like to introduce our guest for today. August 2007 will be remembered as a crossroad moment in modern financial history. First came the American subprime mortgage market. In August, the market for Canadian third-party asset-backed commercial paper was frozen. And so since last summer, Canadian investors ranging from major corporations to provincial and territorial governments and private individuals have been holding a lot of paper, close to $33 billion worth. Major players in the market signed the Montreal Accord, turning the short-term debt into long-term instruments, preventing the default of most third-party ABCP. Time needed to hammer out details and put a plan in place in a standstill period that essentially froze the entire market. To come up with a plan for the Pan-Canadian Investors Committee for Third-Party Asset-Backed Commercial Paper was formed, and last week that committee successfully argued for bankruptcy protection for the trusts that issued the paper, allowing more time to find a way to restructure and minimize losses to investors. The chair of the ABCP committee is our honored guest this afternoon. Purdy Crawford was handpicked for the role. If anybody can figure out a way to untangle this particular knot, I'm told it's him. Among his many, many achievements and honors, Purdy Crawford has been counsel with Osler, Hoskin, Harcourt, a Masco CEO, chair of the national panel with respect to single security regulator in Canada, and is a companion of the Order of Canada. This afternoon he joins us and Amanda Lang from Business News Network for a discussion of that committee. And I look forward to hearing that, as I expect each of you will. So please join me in welcoming Amanda and Purdy to our stage.
You go ahead, Purdy. Thank you very much. I hope that the name of the business book that was auctioned off here isn't indicative of the outcome. Getting to maybe isn't exactly what the Montreal Accord had in mind, I think. I do think, though, Purdy, that there are few people who could do what you've done the way you've done it. And I think most people would agree. There aren't many people in Canada who has the respect and is seen as kind of an impartial player.
Tell that to my wife.
Well, I assume she's here or watching. Was it a tough decision to agree to do it?
Yes. My success in life has always been getting better people than you are to work for you. And we have some incredibly good advisors with the Goodman firm and J.P. Morgan, and they all know a hell of a lot more about this than I do. But I'm the warm guy with the empathy, and that's my role.
I wonder there must have been times in Montreal when there wasn't empathy going on, but we'll leave that inside the negotiating room.
I find it's more successful to be nice than confrontational.
I'm not alone, I think, in saying that in July 2007 I was quite blissfully ignorant of this market.
Right.
When you were called, did you know what they were talking about? Did you know what it was?
I took away a lot of material for the weekend and read it, but I'd been in Nova Scotia in late August, and it's hard to get any newspapers, particularly in the local papers down there, about commercial paper, short-term paper freezing up. I didn't know a thing about it, but life goes on.
So let's talk about what's on the table here, because it's not a done deal, and it involves some novel concepts in capital markets and law. So the deal that you have, in simple terms, please, what are we talking about? What are you offering?
Well, it was a very arduous and complex negotiations with a lot of players, all having the same ultimate end in mind, but different ideas and different interests. And what we ultimately come up with was a structure that we think is in the benefit of everybody, including the retail investors. Come to that later. And basically, it's taking all the trusts, some 21 or 22 trusts, and with the series, about 32 of them, and pooling them and having a complex negotiation of gives and puts to create value in the new paper that does not exist today. And the gives and puts, we got incredible contribution from what we call the asset providers, mostly the foreign banks, who changed what we call the triggers so that the possibility of going into default in the future became much more remote. They provided significant margin funding at 160, which is real buy, 1.6%. We got the major role from the Canadian banks in providing margin funding. And we got from our investors, particularly the Montreal, the original investors, they don't get the credit they deserve because they decided to self-fund. And some people are suspicious of that, but if they went out in the market today to cover that risk, it would probably cost them 6% basis points, 600 basis points. Whereas we got it for the smaller investors for 160 basis points. So it's a pooling of the assets, it's complicated structure because, one, we wanted to make sure that there was an equalization between assets of different value. You couldn't pull them all in together and treat them equal because they were different values. So J.P. Morgan came up with an equalization formula that they worked to. And we also had to make sure that as much of the paper as possible would have credit ratings. And that complicated the structure even more. But it's I can understand why a retail investor would get this great pile of paper and say to hell with this and throw it to one side. But we're getting there.
Let's take this in pieces. One of the things that happened, of course, was that what had been a working market, however in trouble it was frozen. Do we have any idea, have you had any advice from J.P. Morgan or anybody else, what would have happened to the value of these assets if they hadn't been frozen, if this deal hadn't been struck?
It's hard to know what would have happened back in August of last year in Montreal. It's hard for me to speak to that. Today, if this deal comes unraveled, doesn't get approved, all the triggers on the current paper are pretty well breached, yes. Like some 85 to 90% of them. So the odds are pretty long there'd be a fire sale and there'd be disaster for all of our investors, small, big, or otherwise. And what we're trying to do in this process is increase the value, and I think we have remarkably that comes out as a result of the restructuring. And that only happened, we've had a lot of criticism about long-term matching the commercial paper maturity to the maturity of the mortgages, et cetera, on the other side, but that could only happen by putting together the matching of the assets and liabilities.
One question coming from the room is, under what circumstances might a restructuring agreement not be reached?
Well, I think the major issue now going ahead, there are other issues, but is we made the decision, we being the Investors Committee with our advisors, that we would go under CCAA for several reasons. One, to go and have a meeting of each series, 32 meetings. We'd have probably got it okayed in many of them, but some of them would have not been approved. And I was criticized that when we were thinking in that way that you leave these people high and dry. So with this pooling concept and bringing them all together and value equalization concept, we've made a lot of headway, and we're very pleased about where we are. But you want to look ahead. The big issue is retail investors who say, quite justifiably, I have great empathy for them and feeling for them, and I get emails from them every day, and they're articulate and well expressed, that they're being left out, that they're not being treated properly. And we have to, in a major way, turn our attention to how we're going to deal with those issues. Because when we made the decision to go under CCAA and pool the assets, we knew quite consciously that we were giving, in addition to a 2/3 principal amount vote, we were giving all of the holders of the paper one vote, no matter how much paper they owned. So we knew that these people would be at the table eventually. I must say, if I'd have known there were so many of them early on and had more contact with them, we'd have had them on our committee. But when the requests started coming, we were 90% of the way through, and it was hard to adjust that.
So let's answer some of the questions that retail investors have.
Okay.
Is there any way for anybody to get 100 cents on the dollar on the paper that they hold?
Yes, there's a way. We can't guarantee it for all the paper, but those who hold to maturity will get, most cases, 100 cents on the dollar.
If you have paper that's backed by high-quality assets and you hold it for 5 to 8 years, you'll be whole.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, you'll get whatever stream of income.
You'll get a stream of income that depends on what the rates are from time to time, and the bankers' acceptances or LIBOR rates is not bad, or may be bad depending on how rates fluctuate. But the present value of what you would get 100% of at maturity is not 100% today.
If you need to trade it, do you expect there to be, if this deal is ratified, a secondary market immediately in this paper? If there are retail investors that need to sell their paper, will there be a market for that?
Well, we are in the course of creating transparency, and it's a difficult transparency because it's so incredibly complex. So a lot of people will need advisors to help them work their way through it. But I'm confident. This much paper, 32 billion, there'll be a market. And I hope over time, with transparency, that it'll develop into a healthy market. What it trades at, God only knows. I'm sure early on there'll be a lot of low bids, but how it ultimately trades, some people might be able to tell you, but my advisors can't tell me.
There is one element of the agreement that is troublesome to some retail investors, and maybe the single biggest stumbling block, and that's the so-called master release. They agree, if they agree to this agreement, that they will not sue. They give up their right to sue. Mm-hmm. How difficult is that to sell for a retail investor who feels that they have been left out of the process and they want that legal right?
Well, if you look at the material, and I'm not going to go through it, but there were a lot of gives and takes in this arduous negotiation. Certainly the major investors on my committee gave up a lot, including the commitment to self-fund. I don't think we'd have ever got the margin funding otherwise without their commitment to self-fund and take a huge risk. They've helped in many other ways. They're very wise people. Helped Goodman's and J.P. Morgan with me looking over their shoulder to come up with a structure. The dealer banks made big contributions. They all want releases. I can understand the retail investors being concerned about this, or many investors. The reality is the major investors are giving the same releases. They won't be able to sue banks or whoever sold them the paper, or the asset providers, or whatever. It's a tough one to accept, but you have to look at the alternative. The alternative is collapsing, lawsuits, long, arduous lawsuits potentially, because if you sue X, X will join Y, and Y will join B, and that's several years. And God knows where it ends up. It's not so obvious that people are liable. After all, this paper, this type of paper, was sold all around the world without any transparency, just credit rating, and some very sophisticated people, including our investors, and other types of paper, but similar in other parts of the world. And the Canacords of the world sold this paper, but they were completely innocent. They, in a sense, maybe they should have done more due diligence, but maybe some very big investors should have also. It's not obvious to me that anybody would be clearly liable, unless there were very special circumstances in a given case where there was a misrepresentation or somebody.
You and I have heard from the same investors, some of whom, not all of whom, but some of whom say they wound up owning paper that they didn't mean to own. They thought they were putting their bank account, essentially their ready cash, in government-backed securities, T-bills or the like. And they wound up owning commercial paper with higher yields that has been frozen now. Heartbreaking stories from people who can't access their money.
It is heartbreaking. And
Are they in a different category, I guess is my question, than...
Well, that's an IDA or self-regulatory issue as to knowing your client and whether you properly behaved in terms of whether your client knew they were buying this paper or didn't know it, and lots of people sold it, not just Canacord.
Right.
And that's an issue there, and so be it. I'm hopeful that the retail investors will get some good advisors and will come to the table realistically. And I'm quite hopeful through moral suasion or otherwise that we can put hopefully, but I can't commit, quite a package on the table for them.
All right,
let's
talk about the otherwise. The retail investors do have, as of today, legal representation for all of them in one body. So presumably,
I don't know whether it's one body or not. There are a lot of retail investors, maybe 1,400.
Yeah.
I have no idea how many of them have this legal representation.
Okay.
But they have common interests. I don't want to downplay the fact that they have representation.
In their negotiation, either with many lawyers or one, I hope for your sake it's just the one, do you countenance any possibility of making a deal, of saying it's a relatively small slice of the overall $33 billion market, we're going to give you 100 cents?
We'll make a deal.
Will it be 100 cents?
I don't know. No. I can't say what the deal will be. I can just tell you we'll make a deal.
In order to get the agreement from the group?
It's in order to get the agreement from everybody. There are a lot of actors here. Okay.
Do we know, this is a question from the room, what kind of support exists today? Have you had any sense from, you said it yourself, you gave them a lot of power. Do you know what they're thinking?
Well, I talk to a fair number of them, and I get emails and email back a fair number of them. Some of them are angry, justifiably in their perspective. Some are quite understanding and hopeful that I will play a role in reforming the system once we get this behind us. Others are to be convinced, but they have an open mind. They seem to have some, they know they have some power, and they're not going to hesitate probably to use it, to be frank with you. My really concern is that they'll overplay their hand and the thing will come crumbling down. That's the real concern.
Well, that gets us to a bit of advice from Don Johnson.
Oh,
and in my experience, you should always take Don's advice.
I should tell you about Don. I was at a dinner once.
Oh, no.
Sorry, Don. And we had a Canadian who had won a Nobel Prize in economics who was speaking. And Don gets up and starts to cross-examine him. And so I'm a little afraid when I get a question from him.
Well, it's not about common currency zones. He says, to get the support of that majority of the retail investors, why don't you talk to them directly? Could you write a one-page letter?
Well, we're going across the country starting Monday. Start Monday morning in Toronto, Monday afternoon in Montreal, Tuesday morning in Edmonton, and Tuesday afternoon in Calgary, and Wednesday morning in Vancouver. And I'll be talking to them. And we'll have call-ins, and we'll have a number they can call in. I think, I think some of them are just burned out when they got this big package. The reality is we've created transparency, but it's not that easy for everybody to understand. And I got an email a couple of days ago. Guy said, when I got this, I just threw it across the room. To hell with this.
It's about the size of a phone book.
Yeah, it's necessary. I mean, if you want to have an intelligent market to create a secondary over-the-counter market, you have to have the transparency. But these issues are complex issues, the trades and the swaps and all those things.
One of the things you've done here with your friends from Goodman's help is invented a solution that's never happened before. We've never seen a financial asset class put into CCAA. Does that make it more complex? I mean, you're dealing with a judge who's never seen this before. You're dealing with lawyers who are making it up as they go along.
Sometimes I think you're right.
I know lawyers. But
No,
it's more complex because it's new.
It is complex. It is new. We're pioneering both with J.P. Morgan and with Goodman's. As I say, they're a hell of a lot smarter than I am, but I have to keep them under control if they get too excited or something. But other than that, it is a complex thing. I'm quite confident we'll work our way through it, but I don't, this has been a long, arduous, I've gone home at more nights and feeling good that we made a breakthrough and look at my BlackBerry a few hours later and find out we have another big problem. And so but we're on the home stretch, and we'll get there.
One of the things we all need to keep in mind, of course, including retail investors, I think, is that this is happening not in a vacuum, but in the context of global financial markets that are still very much in turmoil. And we still hear from Canadian banks today in Montreal, we're hearing from one of them, about exposure to risk and possible downside. Does that focus the mind a little bit on getting this deal done? Yes.
In December, late December, when we come out with a partial solution, what they call the spreads between, say, LIBOR and more speculative paper was, I guess, with 161.6% committed for margin funding. If you went out and hedged that, it would cost you 3% or something. When the markets went to hell in January and February, if you went out and hedged that, it would probably cost you 6-7%. So it became much more difficult. Wasn't easy. And sometimes I thought we might not make it. Now, the last few days, the spreads have tightened again, i.e. they've become better. They're not so far apart. And I think, but what's happened around the world, in addition to this, the U.S. is the greatest economic engine in the world. They can use creative destruction, and Mr. Schumpeter perhaps better than any other country in the world. On the other hand, all of this great drive leads to excesses, and a lot of this was excesses in the U.S. mortgage market, plus the creation, and this was both New York and Europe, creation of financial products that the people up on top didn't know anything about. Well, they didn't know anything about them, but they didn't understand them. And Warren Buffett says in his latest letter in his annual report that you only know who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. So that's what we're discovering here.
The hunt for yield, the hunt for returns, which had, I mean, that was a worldwide phenomenon when the spreads were abnormal. Could this happen again?
No, I think the next issue will be, we'll all work. There will be reform coming out of the U.S. One thing's clear to me: if you're going to reform this system, you can't do it for the most part, on a one-country basis. It's a worldwide issue, and there'll be reforms. Hopefully, it won't involve too much intrusion, but that'll not be the next issue. This is behind us. It'll be some other thing in the financial world. Don't ask me to predict what it might be, but those things happen every 10 years or so.
Question from the floor about liability. Would advisors who previously missold ABC paper to retail customers be liable, or are they also covered by the waiver?
I think for the most part they'd be released.
And here's one, of course, that everybody wants the answer to. I don't know if there is one, but do the rating agencies bear any responsibility for what happened?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's never been I had this researched, never been a successful lawsuit in the U.S. against a rating agency. I don't think we've had any lawsuits in terms of liability in Canada. They rated the paper. They had the transparency they needed, but they were prohibited by the asset providers from creating transparency. I think it would be a long shot, to be frank with you. But I don't know. I should ask the lawyers that question.
Somebody is somewhere. In terms of your role and what we have here, do you believe with all your heart that this is the best possible deal? Best
possible deal? Well, as I keep saying and through this process, what we're doing is the art of the possible. I could sit down and be theoretical and come up with a deal and didn't have to negotiate it with 100 other people. Why, it would be better than what we had to negotiate with all these people. But what we did is the art of the possible, and people were very cooperative, but as I said, they had their own interests, and we worked our way through it. I think was incredible testimony to the system, financial system.
And are you optimistic?
Very optimistic.
About this?
About this.
For those that hold it and want to know, a tough question, but we'll finish with, when do you think we might know what's going to happen?
Well, if we follow our schedule, there will be a meeting of the note holders in late April. We then go back to court a few days later, where the judge will look at the results of the vote. We'll hear arguments as to whether it's fair, and either make a decision or make a partial decision. If you're optimistic, you'll make a decision to go ahead. Then you wait until the appeal period expires, and sometime in May, mid or late May, optimistically, this will be behind us.
So by summertime, you're free to head to Halifax if you like.
Halifax, yeah, that's right.
We appreciate your time today and the work you've done, Purdy.
Thank you.
Purdy Crawford. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we could have this program rebroadcast on Comedy Central. Who knew commercial paper could be so funny? Anyway, I have the honor today of thanking Purdy Crawford for being with us, and I want to say my sense of Purdy Crawford is he's the closest thing to Canada has to a superhero, a highly respected lawyer. A highly respected lawyer, a successful corporate executive, he is the man for all seasons. He is the man that all levels of government in Canada come to when they've got a thorny legal or financial problem. He always says yes. He always approaches a challenge with grace and humor and thoughtfulness, and we have seen a lot of that on the podium today. He is just a man who can't say no, something like Anno Addy. We are very grateful that when we asked him to speak to the Canadian Club today, he also said yes. And for many of us, you've made a very difficult subject easier to understand, and you've made us a little better prepared and a little more sanguine about the vagaries of contemporary market instruments. We are delighted you said yes to the Canadian Club. Thank you very much.
And that concludes our afternoon. Purdy, thank you. Amanda, thank you for your help. And to all of you for coming. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.